The most powerful beings in the ancient world were on their knees, weeping, begging a mortal man to write them a letter. Not a king, not a warrior, not a god, a man. One man with a scroll tucked under his arm, standing beside a cold river in the shadow of a mountain no one climbs anymore. And the beings in front of him, beings who had once stood in the courts of heaven, beings whose children had terrorized entire civilizations, beings who had rewritten the architecture of human knowledge, were afraid of him. Not because of his weapons, not because of his armies, because of what he was carrying. And because they already knew before he opened it every word inside. His name was Enoch, seventh in the line from Adam, the only man in the Hebrew genealogies who never died. Before this is over, you'll understand three things. Why a document was removed from your Bible, not by accident, not by debate, but by decision. What that document actually says that made it too dangerous to keep. And why the most terrifying thing in the pre-flood world was not a giant, not a fallen angel, not a flood. It was a man who simply told the truth. This is Enoch's burden. Let me tell you something about the man who built the Christian canon. They were not stupid. They were not careless. They knew exactly which books they were removing. And they had reasons. That is what makes this interesting. The Book of Enoch was not obscure. It was not fringe. Jude, the letter sitting in your New Testament right now, quotes it directly by name. Tertullian called it scripture. Clement of Alexandria treated it as authoritative. Origen cited it without apology. These were the architects of early Christian theology. Not casual readers. Not fringe figures. The men who shaped what Christianity became. They had read the Book of Enoch. They had considered it. Some of them treated it as equal to anything in the accepted canon. And then someone decided it had to go. The councils that finalized the Christian canon, Nicaea, Carthage, Hippo, are usually taught as scholarly gatherings. Learned men pursuing truth in good faith. What they were, more accurately, was political events. With winners and losers. With pressure from emperors. With active agendas about what kind of Christianity would be permitted to survive, and what kind would not. The winning version needed a coherent narrative. A stable, controllable one. A text that could function inside imperial structures without perpetually interrogating them. The Book of Enoch described in precise, unflinching, name detail what happens when beings entrusted with enormous power abuse that power. What the consequences look like. What the collateral damage is. What the judgment eventually costs. That description was too recognizable, too applicable to structures that still had names, buildings, and armies in the 4th century. So they called it unauthorized, categorized it as apocryphal, and they moved on. They nearly succeeded. For 15 centuries, the Western world lost it entirely. It survived only in Ethiopia inside the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which never accepted the Roman canon determination, and never stopped reading what Rome had buried. Then 1773 happened. A Scottish explorer named James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 complete copies. The scholarly world received them the way institutions always receive inconvenient evidence, with discomfort dressed up as methodological skepticism. Then 1947 happened. A Bedouin shepherd threw a stone into a cave above the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Heard something shatter. Inside, sealed clay jars. Linen-wrapped scrolls. Among them fragments of the Book of Enoch. In Aramaic. Dated to centuries before the Common Era. The Dead Sea community had not hidden these scrolls because they were mythological. You do not go to that kind of trouble hiding, sealing in clay, burying in caves for a story you think might be legend. You do that for something you believe is true. And something you believe someone powerful once suppressed. Here's what they were protecting. 200 beings descended onto a mountain and made a pact. The text names the mountain Mount Hermon, Northern Israel. Still standing. The pact had one specific design sworn collectively, so no single one of them could be blamed alone. Every one of them was equally bound. Every one of them was equally accountable. Or so the reasoning went. That detail matters. That is not mythology adding atmosphere. That is a group of powerful beings engineering deniability before they act. Distributing culpability across a group so no individual can be fully held responsible. You have seen that pattern before. It is still running. What followed the descent was not chaos. It was curriculum. Azazel taught men metallurgy, how to forge swords, shields, instruments of war. He taught women cosmetic chemistry, how to use minerals and roots to alter appearance, to turn beauty into leverage and manipulation. Samyaza taught enchantments, the binding of spiritual forces. Armoros taught how to break them. Barakidal mapped the stars for earthly power. Ezekiel decoded weather patterns. Arakiel taught the reading of the earth itself. Knowledge. All of it. Real. Applicable. Genuinely useful. Unlocked simultaneously, every door thrown open at once before the world had developed the wisdom or the structure to walk through any of them responsibly. The problem with the Watchers was not that the knowledge was false. The problem was the timing. The context. The complete absence of any framework for what to do with it. That distinction matters more than it might seem. What one Enoch records next is not dramatic. That is what makes it devastating. Chapter 8. 3 phrases. Almost no elaboration. Impiety increased. Violence multiplied. Men were led astray. The Nephilim, the offspring of the Watchers, turned first on each other, then on humanity, then on animals, then on the land itself. The earth cried out. Not a metaphor. The ancient text treats that phrase as a literal description, a world under so much accumulated pressure from so much accumulated violence that its suffering had become audible. The cry reached somewhere. And the response, when it came, was specific. Into all of this Enoch moved in the opposite direction. While the world ran through every unlocked door, he withdrew. Genesis gives him 3 words. He walked with God. In Hebrew, that is not decoration. It is a technical phrase: sustained, daily, deliberate alignment. A life consistently oriented towards something other than what the world around him was offering and consuming. But here is what Genesis leaves out. What only the Book of Enoch preserves. Enoch grieved. He was not above it all. He was not detached, floating at a spiritual altitude that kept the suffering below him at a comfortable distance. He felt the weight of what was happening around him. He mourned the waste of it, what the unlocked knowledge had cost the world, what the violence was destroying that could never be rebuilt, what the earth was losing in ways that might not be recoverable. He carried the grief as part of his daily orientation. He did not use it as an excuse to disengage. He did not let it consume him until he became useless. He stayed present to the pain. And he kept walking towards something better. That combination, genuine grief and continued daily orientation, is rarer than it sounds. Most people who feel the weight of suffering either become paralyzed by it or go numb to survive. Enoch did neither. He walked with both at once, for a lifetime. That is what the Qumran community meant when they preserved his title, Scribe of Righteousness. Not a warrior. Not a king. Not a prophet in the conventional sense. A scribe, the one whose job is to record what is true, without embellishment, without softening, without using the record for personal benefit. All the way to the end of the document. Even when the beings receiving the news are weeping in front of you. They did weep. I will show you exactly where. On a riverbank you can still visit. But first, the petition they asked him to carry. Because it is not what most people assume it was. The Watchers felt it before Enoch arrived. Chapter 12 of 1 Enoch describes it with precision. The presence that had defined the architecture of their existence, the constant underneath everything they had ever known, was gone. Not dimmed. Not withdrawn in warning. Not reduced as a consequence they could appeal. Gone. What replaced it was a silence they had no category for. Not the silence of patience. The silence of a verdict already written. Just not yet read aloud. And so they went looking for Enoch. Beings who had once governed the movements of stars and seasons. Beings whose offspring had broken the pre-flood world. Beings who had possessed knowledge and capability that no human has ever accessed. They tracked down a mortal man, a scribe with calloused hands and a worn robe, and asked him to pray on their behalf. Because they themselves, the text implies, could no longer be heard at all. Not silenced by force. Simply no longer audible to the presence they had chosen to abandon. They didn't beg God. They begged a man. Sit with that. Enoch agreed. He wrote every word of their petition, every grievance, every appeal, every argument they wished to make. Faithfully. Without filtering. Without inserting his own judgment about what they deserved. A true scribe does not curate the truth. He records it. Then he carries it. Then he went to deliver it. And what happened next is 1 Enoch chapter 14, one of the most extraordinary passages in all of ancient literature. The winds came for him. Clouds formed beneath his feet. Stars appeared on every side. He was taken in body or in vision. The ancient text does not resolve this and brought before something the writer clearly had no adequate language for. A structure beyond ordinary scale. Walls of hailstone. A floor of fire. A ceiling of living flame crossed by paths of stars. Around it a second structure, larger than the first, made entirely of tongues of fire. Inside the innermost chamber, a throne. Wheels of the sun rotating beneath it. Rivers of fire pouring from the base. Cherubim surrounding it on every side. And upon the throne a figure the writer reaches for every image he possesses. And every image falls short. Robes whiter than snow. Hair like white wool. A face, and here the writer simply stops reaching like the sun at the exact moment it becomes impossible to look at directly. I want to stay on that failure for a moment. Because it is not a literary weakness. It is evidence of something. A writer inventing something describes it clearly. Invented things are obedient, they stay exactly as you shape them. At the scale you choose, with the details you select. A writer transcribing something, they actually encountered something that exceeded every available category of their language, writes exactly like this. Reaching. Falling short. Trying a different image. Falling short again. Stopping mid-sentence because no sentence will hold it. You do not write like that about something you made up. You write like that about something that happened to you and you cannot fully explain. Enoch fell on his face. His body shook. He could not speak. Then the voice. Come near, Enoch. Come near to my holy word. He was raised. He was brought forward. And he was given the answer. Not the answer the watchers had hoped for. 4 declarations. No preamble. No softening. First, you will have no peace. Second, a great condemnation hangs over you. There is no relief. Third, your petition is rejected in full. Fourth, you will watch your children the Nephilim destroy each other. Every one. Until the end. No appeal. No revision. No window. Stop. I need you to notice what you felt when you heard those 4 declarations. Almost certainly cruelty. Disproportionate severity. Something that reads as excessive. That instinct is worth examining. Because it reveals something about the assumptions we live inside. We inhabit a civilization, built entirely on the premise that almost nothing is permanent. Courts overturn sentences. Leaders reverse policies. Institutions revise decisions. The entire architecture of modern law and governance is built on the assumption that any door can be reopened if sufficient force or argument is applied. That assumption is so deep we rarely notice it. It shapes how we hear every story involving judgment. The Book of Enoch is describing a different category of reality. The watchers did not stumble into this. There was no ambiguity, no coercion, no moment of confusion they could point to. They gathered on the summit of a specific mountain. They designed a collective oath specifically to distribute culpability so no individual could be fully held responsible. They descended with complete knowledge of what the order of existence was and what they were choosing to violate. This was not an impulsive mistake. This was a premeditated, collectively engineered restructuring of the cosmic order. By beings who understood that order better than any human ever has. Irreversible choice. Irreversible consequence. The logic only reads as brutal if you believe consequences should be separable from choices. The ancient world did not believe that. And reading this text carefully, I am not sure they were wrong. Enoch had gone in as their advocate. He was coming back as the bearer of their sentence. He had carried their words into the innermost chamber. He was now carrying the answer back out. The gap between advocate and messenger, that was exactly where the burden lives. Now, here is where this text does something that permanently separates it from mythology. It tells you exactly where Enoch went next. And you can go there this week. 1 Enoch chapter 13. Specific. Abel, Maine, near the waters of Dan. The Dan River still runs today. Fed by underground springs and snowmelt from Mount Hermon, the same mountain where the Watchers swore their oath. It moves through what is now the northern tip of Israel, near the ancient city of Dan, near the modern nature reserve at Tel Dan. You can drive there. You can stand on that bank. You can put your hand into the water. The temperature is the same as it was then. The sound it makes over the stones in its bed is the same sound Enoch heard when he sat down to read. That is not atmosphere. That is geography. And geography is how you distinguish history from legend. Vague location is the signature of myth. A myth does not need a real address, it exists wherever the listener imagines it. A historical account names a specific, verifiable, still existing river, because the writer expected readers to go and check. The writer of 1 Enoch named a river, named the mountain, named the valley. These are real. You can verify all of them. Enoch went there alone. He found the Watchers gathered, waiting. And what he found was not what power looks like in any story ever told about power. 1 Enoch chapter 13. Direct words. They were seized with fear and trembling. They fell on their faces. They wept. Stop again. Because this one detail, this specific, carefully preserved observation is the most important thing in this story. And it is almost never discussed. We understand power one way. Size. Force. The capacity to destroy. The ability to cause others to fear. The Nephilim had that in full measure. The Watchers had more than that. They had once been celestial, had walked in the immediate presence of the divine, had possessed knowledge and capability no human being has ever accessed. And they were afraid of a man holding a scroll. Why? The scroll had no army behind it, no physical threat inside it, no leverage. It was ink on papyrus. Words in a specific order. What the Watchers were terrified of was not the document. What they were terrified of was the truth the document contained. and specifically the fact that they already knew every word of it before he unrolled a single inch. They had made every choice the document described. They had watched every consequence ripple outward across the violence, across the suffering, across the earth crying out, and they had continued anyway. They knew. And now someone was standing in front of them who also knew, and had written it down. Clearly, accurately, without editing a single word in their favor. That is a completely different category of terror than anything physical can produce. It is not the terror of facing something stronger than you. It is not pain, or destruction or loss. It is the terror of being seen. Completely. Without the mercy of your own self-deception. Enoch sat down beside the river. He read them every word. All the way through. To the end. The river kept moving. Cold. Constant. Completely indifferent to everything happening on its bank. It had been moving before the watchers descended. It would keep moving after. It did not pause for verdicts. It did not hold its breath for grief. Enoch read to the end. Folded the scroll. Stood. Walked away. The river kept moving. Then silence. Then grief. Not defiance. Not rage. Not bargaining. The specific, irreversible grief of beings who finally understand that a door one they walk through together, deliberately, with full knowledge will never open again. Enoch did not ask for this. No record of him seeking visibility. No record of him building a platform, cultivating influence, engineering proximity to power. He was simply present. Consistent. Oriented, daily, toward something other than what everyone around him was chasing. And that consistency across decades, in a world that offered him every reason to abandon it, made him the only viable candidate when the commission came. I want to say something about this pattern that I think most readings of Enoch get wrong. The common reading treats his selection as reward as if God looked down, identified the most righteous man, and gave him the difficult assignment as recognition of merit. A kind of spiritual performance bonus. I do not read it that way. And I think that reading actually misses what makes Enoch useful. I think the selection was practical. Functional. The way you select a surgeon. Not the way you award a prize. You need someone who can hold the instrument steady under pressure. Who has the specific interior architecture required to do the work without contaminating the result. Who has no stake in how the patient receives the diagnosis. And that interior architecture is only built one way. Through years of daily, unremarked, unwitnessed choices. Moses was tending sheep in a wilderness for 40 years before the commission came. Not building a following. Not positioning himself. Not developing the narrative that would eventually make him famous. Just becoming someone whose hands had learned patience. Whose ambition had been worn down into something quieter and more durable. The messenger is always found in the place no one was watching. That is not a romantic observation. It is a functional description of why the right person is rarely the obvious one. Consider what happens when the commission goes to the wrong person. Someone who has spent years building identity around access and influence. They cannot deliver a hard truth cleanly, because the delivery costs them something they are not willing to lose: their relationship, their reputation, their position. So they shade the truth, frame it carefully, protect themselves while appearing to speak plainly. They tell themselves they are being strategic, diplomatic, wise, choosing the right moment. They are being compromised, and the truth arrives distorted at exactly the moment when distortion is most costly. Enoch had nothing to protect. No relationship with the Watchers requiring maintenance. No audience to manage. No position that delivering bad news would threaten. He could say it exactly as it was because there was nothing at stake for him personally in how they received it. That is not a heroic quality. It is the natural consequence of a particular kind of life. The kind you build quietly, over years, without knowing it will eventually be needed for something. But here is the part I have never heard discussed when people talk about Enoch. The burden was not delivering the verdict. Any courier could carry a verdict. The burden was what condition the truth was in when it arrived, and what Enoch felt while carrying it. He had written their petition. That means he had read their words carefully enough to record them faithfully. He understood their appeal, understood it well enough to represent it accurately. He knew what they were hoping for. He had received the answer. 4 declarations. He knew there was nothing in them resembling hope. Now he was standing in front of beings who were weeping, who had once been magnificent, celestial, capable, genuinely powerful in ways no human can fully comprehend, who had chosen corruption so completely and so deliberately that no remnant of what they had been could be retrieved. He was not there to punish them, not there to witness their humiliation with satisfaction. He was there to read a document to its end. And that is all he did. The ancient texts call what he demonstrated in that moment righteousness. But not as a moral grade, not as a certificate of good behavior earned through rule following. They use it as a technical description, a correctly calibrated instrument, something that reads accurately without adding distortion in either direction, clarity without cruelty. We have words for both failure modes. The person who has the truth and uses it as a weapon to humiliate, to establish superiority, to enjoy the power of knowing something others do not, we call that contempt, usually dressed up as principle. The person who has genuine compassion and loses their clarity inside it, who softens the truth until it becomes something other than the truth, who chooses to be kind at the direct expense of being honest, we call that cowardice, usually with a kinder name. Compassion, sensitivity, emotional intelligence. Both are betrayals. They just betray different things. The person who can hold both simultaneously, who can deliver the hardest possible news without losing either their precision or their care for the dignity of the one receiving it, we barely have a word for that at all. The ancient world had one Scribe of righteousness, and it was not a title anyone gave themselves. After the confrontation at Dan, the visions continued. Enoch was shown the full arc of what came next. The binding of the watchers confined beneath the earth until a final accounting. The destruction of the Nephilim. The flood. The cleansing of what had been so thoroughly corrupted it could no longer be reformed incrementally. And then this is the part that gets consistently overlooked in every popular treatment of this text: renewal. Not permanent ruin. Not the end of the story. Something clean on the other side. The earth's cry heard and answered. The corruption ended. The possibility of something better not just hoped for but structurally guaranteed. The judgment and the promise were not separate. They were inseparable, two parts of the same declaration. You could not have one without the other. Enoch carried both, all the way to the end of the scroll, without dropping either one. And then Genesis 5:24. The strangest sentence in the Hebrew genealogies. 11 generations, each described identically: born, lived, fathered children, died. The pattern is relentless. It is designed to be relentless, to establish what normal looks like so that the break, when it comes, is impossible to miss. And Enoch walked with God. And he was not. For God took him. No illness. No burial site. No recorded final breath. No tomb. No grave. 4 words in Hebrew. He was here. Then he was not. That is every word Genesis provides. And in 3,000 years of scholarship, no one has produced a fully satisfying explanation of what they mean. The ancient interpreters, from the Dead Sea community to the early rabbis to the first-century writers who kept these scrolls sealed in clay, read the departure as a form of recognition, not reward in the transactional sense. Completion. The man who had carried the hardest truth faithfully, without distortion, without using it for anything other than what it was given for, without softening a single word for the comfort of anyone, exited history in a way that made every reader across 3 millennia ask the same question. What does that mean? The text does not answer directly. It simply records the departure and moves on. Which is, itself, a kind of answer. Some completions do not require commentary. The scribes at Qumran were not living comfortably when they preserved this text. Roman occupation, institutional corruption, the categories of sacred and political blurring in ways they could see clearly and could not stop. They kept the Book of Enoch because they believed it was not a description of the ancient past. They believed it was a description of their present, the same dynamics, the same patterns, the same choices generating the same consequences under different names in a different century. And they believed that somewhere, without announcement, without a visible platform, without anyone watching, there were people already building the interior conditions that would make them the only viable candidates for whatever commission came next. The burden of Enoch is not a story about a prophet. It is a story about what it costs to be that kind of person, and what that kind of person ultimately produces. The watchers fell because they could not remain where they were supposed to be. The Nephilim fell because the earth could not hold what they had become. And Enoch walked with God. 3 words. Only for him. In a list of men defined entirely by how long they lived and how they died, he is the only one whose story ends differently. The scribes who sealed these scrolls in clay and buried them in caves above a desert sea did not do it because it was safe. It was not safe. Preserving texts that contradicted the official canon under Roman occupation was not a low-risk activity. They did it because they believed this account contained something the official record had made a deliberate decision to exclude. Not by accident. Not through carelessness. By decision. And they were not willing to let that decision stand unchallenged. The shepherd who broke that silence in 1947, the one who threw the stone into the cave, heard the shatter, found the sealed jars, was not a scholar. He had no institutional credentials, no research agenda, no awareness of what 2,000 years of burial meant for the documents he was holding. He was doing what Bedouin shepherds do in those hills. And because of what he found, and what he chose to do with it, scholars are still reconstructing those fragments today. He changed the history of human understanding. Without a platform. Without an audience. Without knowing what he was holding when he first reached into that cave. That pattern should feel familiar by now. The Dan River is still running. The water moves at the same temperature over the same stones. Mount Hermon still rises above that valley, snow-capped through most of the year, visible from dozens of kilometers away. Somewhere between that riverbank and this moment, a scribe sat down with a scroll and told beings who had once governed stars exactly what the verdict was. Without softening it. Without enjoying it. Without using it for anything other than what it was given for. That is what it looks like to finish reading. There will be moments, probably sooner than you expect, where you have a truth that costs something to say. Where the easier version is available. Where the softer framing is right there. And using it would cost you nothing visible. And no one would call you on it. In those moments, the river will still be moving. Whether you speak or not. Whether you finish reading or quietly fold the scroll before you get to the end. The river does not notice either way. The only question is whether you do. Enoch finished reading. The ancient scribes who preserved this account believed with enough conviction to risk their safety on it that this fact mattered. That the world needed to know it had happened at least once. That someone, in the long and chaotic record of human and celestial failure, had carried the hardest truth to its destination. Intact. Without corruption. Without revision. They thought that was worth preserving. I think they were right. And I think if you've made it this far, some part of you already knew that before I said it. Which brings me to the question I want to leave you with. Not one with a clean answer. Not the kind that resolves in the comments and disappears. The kind that stays with you after you close this. Was Enoch a prophet? Or was he just the only honest man left? I don't think those are the same thing. A prophet speaks on behalf of something larger than himself. An honest man simply refuses to distort what he sees. Sometimes those are the same person. Often they are not. And the distance between them, between speaking because you were commissioned and speaking because you refuse to lie, is one of the most important distances in the entire record of human behavior. Enoch may have done both at the same time. In a world that had made both nearly impossible. Which one you think actually explains him? I think that says something real about what you believe truth requires of people. Tell me in the comments. I want to know which side you land on. And I want to know why. If you wanted to keep following these buried texts, the ones the councils removed, the ones communities died to preserve, subscribe. The binding of Azazel. The Nephilim Wars. What happened after the flood? The fate of the Watchers still confined beneath the earth. Whether any of this maps onto anything still visible in the world we are living in right now. These are the threads we will keep pulling. One text at a time.
Enter the realm of divine secrets. Welcome to Bible Confidential.